Hello, this is Tony Blazer for the Motocross Vault presented by Blinzall. If you're in the market for some high-quality racing oil for your two-stroke or four, make sure you go to blinzall.com and use our discount code VAULT20 to save 20% at checkout. Thank you for all the support.
Hey, this is David Iser from DMXS Radio, and you are about to get roosted in the Motocross Vault.
Hello and welcome back to the Motocross Vault. My name is Tony Blazer, and what this video is going to cover is a look back at one of the more iconic four-strokes of the 1980s, Yamaha's TT350. Now, this is a machine I so wanted in the mid-80s. I mean, at the time, I didn't really know a ton about bikes when this thing first came out, and the thought of a 350 four-stroke to me seemed like such a badass machine. I really wanted one. I thought the thing looked cool. Actually, the XRs, I thought they were great looking bikes the year before in 1985 when they came out with the new XR, and then Honda promptly killed the 350, which at the time I thought was kind of puzzling. Yamaha comes out with this competitor the next year, the TT350, and I love the styling on it. It just looked like a really cool machine. I've never had one, actually. I'd love to have one now to trail ride. It'd be fun. I imagine it probably as rare as hen's teeth these days, but it was a really neat machine. Machine I think Yamaha really executed well on what its intended use was as a replacement for the XR and kind of filled that niche within the market. Good overall four-stroke. I think Yamaha had some really good bikes. The TT's a good buddy of mine had a TT500, and that thing was just a monster. It was a little bit sketchy for me, a little too much. Definitely, the thing weighed about 300 pounds, and it was just like, you grab a handful of things, you just want to stand up. At the time, it was way too much motorcycle for me, but something like a 350 or something would have been fun to have. I would love to have it. But a buddy of mine had an XR 350. I thought that thing was super fun. I just never was able to pick one of these up. But Yamaha only produced it for a couple years. It was 86 and 87 here in the U.S. at least. It was available in some other markets for a little longer than that. But for some reason, I don't know whether these 350s didn't sell that well. Like I said, Honda abandoned theirs after only a couple years too. So it's kind of strange. The TTs, I think they had a smaller version of the 225 as well. And I guess you would think these four-strokes, they were inexpensive, reliable, fun to ride. You'd think they just would have sold like hotcakes. But for some reason, all the Japanese manufacturers, they had a weird relationship with the enduro bikes, whether even with the ITs or the KDXs or whatever. The KDX is really the only one that they stuck with. All these other brands, they seem to kind of like come and go, and Suzuki got tired of the PEs and what have you. But you would think these would be really popular bikes that would have sold a ton of, but for whatever reason, they would dip in and out of this market. But Yamaha came out with this bike in 1986, and like I said, it was only a 2-year model, but I think even today it's pretty well regarded for people who are looking for a fun little trail bike of this vintage. If you'd like to check out some of the other videos I've done, I just did a history of the XR 400 and 350. I just posted that last week. You can find it here on the channel. It goes through every model of the XR350 and the 400 from 1983 when it was introduced until 2004 when it was retired. I also have done histories of the XR250, the XR200/185. So if you're into these mid-80s four-stroke enduro bikes, you're going to find something on my channel to kind of whet that appetite. If you're more into motocross stuff, I've also done several reviews of obviously all kinds of motocross machines from 80 to 500. So definitely check out the channel if you're new to here, and give it a like and a subscription. I would certainly appreciate that. If you'd like to support what I do here at the Motocross Vault, I just came out with some new Motocross Vault merch. Actually, my niece, Sam Flack, had requested a Toyota and Honda combination, so I went with probably my favorite mini truck of the 80s, the Marty McFly Toyota, like from Back to the Future. Really badass looking truck. I mean, I think every one of us wanted one of these Toyota 4x4s in the 80s, and this thing was a really cool looking truck, so I did this. And then I've done a version with a Honda ATC 250R three-wheeler in the back. And I've also done a version with like a Rick Johnson 1987 CR500 in the back. And you can find both of those on my Teespring store. And I will put a link in the description, a little card here in the video as well, if you'd like to check that out. So here, without further ado, is the story of the 1986 Yamaha TT350. In the world of off-roading, there has always been a loyal and passionate following for the rugged and ready-for-anything four-stroke. Even after the transition to the lightweight two-strokes in the 1960s, the manufacturers continued to develop and release an assortment of thumpers aimed at the off-road market. Although far heavier than their two-stroke competition, the smooth power, excellent torque, and stone axe reliability of these valve and cam machines earned them a loyal following that endures to this day. In 1976, Yamaha jumped into the off-road four-stroke game with an all-new big-bore thumper, the TT500. Like other four-strokes of its era, the TT was heavy and slightly cumbersome, but riders loved the gobs of torque it provided from its 499cc engine. The TT500 proved to be an instant hit, and provided the basis for all manner of hot rod racing thumpers in the late 70s and early 80s. During this period, modified TTs found their way to dirt track, desert, enduro, and even motocross competition. In 1979, Honda introduced a TT competitor of its own in the form of the all-new XR500. Like the TT, the new XR featured a large 4-stroke single wrapped in a motocross-style chassis. At the time, the big bore XR was also joined by a 250 and 185 version, and that helped give Honda the widest lineup of full-size 4-strokes in the off-road arena. While far from high performance, the new XRs proved to be a huge hit for Honda. Two-stroke competitors like the Yamaha IT, Suzuki PE, and Kawasaki KDX were all lighter and faster, but people continued to be drawn to the XR's ease of use and rugged reliability. After 6 years of loyal service and virtually no updates, the original TT was finally retired in 1981. While its simple and powerful 4-stroke single continued to be competitive, its mid-70s chassis had fallen far behind the latest in motocross and off-road design. After a year-long hiatus, Yamaha's big bore thumper was back in 1983 with a completely new and up-to-date design. Rechristened the TT600, this new machine brought Yamaha's 4-strokes into the new decade with an all-new motor, redesigned chassis, and majorly upgraded suspension. Overall displacement was boosted to a full 595 cc's, and the chassis was given a serious makeover by bolting on a set of beefy 43mm front forks and grafting on a version of Yamaha's Motocross single-shock rear suspension system. Big, powerful, and rugged, the TT600 proved a perfect competitor to Honda's hugely popular XR500R. In 1983, another all-new 4-stroke machine made its debut in the scene in the form of Honda's all-new XR350R. More than just a downsized 500, the new 350 looked to combine the best traits of the nimble XR250 and the desert-ready XR500 into one package. With its strong torque curve and lighter weight than the big bores, Honda's new 350 proved a very popular machine with riders who found the 500s too burly and the 250s too tame. After 3 years on the market, Honda decided to retire its XR350 after the 1985 season. At the time, this seemed like a pretty surprising move, with the 350 receiving a very well-regarded redesign for the 85 season. This update had addressed nearly all of the issues riders had had with the 83 and 84 versions, and had made the XR350R Honda's most effective 4-stroke racer in the minds of many. With Honda abandoning the mid-size 4-stroke market for 1986, the door was left open for one of their competitors to fill the void. In 1985, Yamaha had dipped their toe into the mid-size market with a new dual-sport machine they coined the XT350. While not as serious or high performance as an XR, the new XT fit nicely between the underpowered 250 dual sports and the big and lumbering 600s. It was capable of hitting 90 miles per hour on the highway, and far more pleasant than the buzzy small bores once the road opened up. For 1986, Yamaha looked to capitalize on Honda's departure by introducing an all-new midsize thumper based around the motor in its popular XT350. Dubbed the TT350, this new machine made it a modified version of the 4-stroke single found in the XT in an all-new off-road specific chassis. By using a combination of motocross and dual sport technology, Yamaha hoped they could create the ultimate mid-size 4-stroke. As with any off-road machine, the heart of the new TT350 was its 346cc 4-stroke power plant. Like Honda's XRs, the new TT eschewed liquid cooling in favor of a lighter and simpler air-cooled design. The motor featured an 86mm by 59.6mm bore and stroke and a 9.0 to 1 compression ratio, which was slightly lower than the 9.5 to 1 found on the outgoing XR. The TT350 stroke was also slightly shorter than the 85 Hondas. Like the XR, the TT employed a 4-valve head with 2 valves for intake and 2 for exhaust. Where the two differed was in the actuation of those valves. On the Honda, a single overhead cam was used in their patented radial 4-valve combustion configuration. On the Yamaha, a more traditional dual overhead cam arrangement was employed, with the fuel being delivered by a pair of dual carburetors through Yamaha's dual intake system, or YDIS. At the time, Yamaha touted the YDIS as a solution to the bogging 4-stroke issue which had plagued thumpers for decades. The YDIS was a unique intake design that Yamaha devised to broaden the motor's effective power band by optimizing the amount of fuel delivered based on the engine load. At low RPMs, only one carburetor and intake runner were activated to prevent too much fuel from being dumped into the cylinder and causing a bog. As the motor's load increased, the intake vacuum would engage a second carburetor to deliver additional fuel for increased top-end power. By fine-tuning this dual carburetor system, Yamaha's engineers believed they were able to combine the low end response of a small carburetor with the stronger pull of a larger mixer. In addition to the YDIS, the new motor featured a counterbalancer to quell vibration and a convenient automatic decompression system to aid starting. While the motor was air-cooled, Yamaha did incorporate a pair of substantial ram scoops below the fuel tank to help keep the engine temperatures under control. Because the new TT350 carried all of its oil inside the motor in a wet sump configuration, this was of critical importance. This allowed Yamaha to make the motor simpler and lighter than a dry sump design, which used a remote tank for oil storage, but it also tended to run much hotter when under heavy use. This had been an issue with early Honda XR350s, and Yamaha hoped to avoid the expensive failures some XR owners had experienced by funneling more cool air to the head on the Yamaha. In the transition from XT to TT, the new off-road version's motor had received several significant upgrades. Both the intake ports were enlarged slightly, and new valves were installed that tapered more significantly to increase flow. New cams were also installed that featured a more aggressive profile, and the carburetors were retuned to deliver additional fuel on demand. The TT's electronic ignition was also recalibrated to work with the more aggressive power settings. Internally, the motor retained the XT's 6-speed transmission and manual clutch, but new ratios were added that better suited the TT's intended use. All the gear sets were also beefed up in anticipation of the more aggressive riding the off-road version was likely to endure. On the chassis side, the new TT350 featured a frame very similar to what was found on the YZs the year before. The frame was constructed of stout, high-tensile steel and featured a single down tube that split into a full cradle below the motor. Below the motor, Yamaha added a set of steel bash bars that offered additional crash protection without the mud-catching issues of a full skid plate. Like the YZs, the new frame lacked any sort of removable rear subframe to aid shock maintenance. The shock itself was a gas oil Showa unit that offered 11 inches of travel and 20 selectable settings for rebound control. Less sophisticated than the units found on the Motocross line, the TT's new damper lacked any sort of external adjustment for compression damping and did without the brake-actuated suspension system found in the YZs. Mated to the shock was Yamaha's Motocross rising rate rear linkage system. Unlike the YZs, which adopted an all-new bottom link Motocross in '86, the TT350 made do with an updated version of the older top link design Yamaha had been using since 1983. Owing to its intended use as an off-road machine, the TT350 did receive a helpful set of Zerk fittings throughout the linkage to help keep everything well lubricated. Finishing off the rear suspension was a lightweight alloy swing arm with a quick-release axle design to aid trailside repairs. On the fork side, the '86 TT350 once again got an inferior version of the hardware found in the Motocross line. By 1986, all of the manufacturers had moved on to a 43mm fork on all of their motocross machines. At the time, this size was believed to offer the optimal combination of comfort and flex resistance. On the TT350, however, Yamaha decided to save a little money by employing a set of 41mm Showa non-adjustable forks to handle the front suspension duties. Without any sort of external adjustment for compression or rebound, fork tuning was limited to adding or subtracting air pressure through a set of Schrader valves on top of each fork. While the new TT350 was certainly not at the cutting edge of off-road design in 1986, it did prove a very capable successor to the mantle vacated by Honda's XR350. With 25.5 horsepower and 18.8 foot-pounds of torque on tap, the TT was certainly no rocket, but it was fun, easy to ride, and reasonably fast for a mid-size four-stroke at the time. Compared to the outgoing XR350, the TT's new motor felt stronger down low, fairly similar through the middle, and a shade weaker on top. On Kirker's dyno, the two motors were actually a dead heat, but on the trail, the TT's stronger low-end response made it feel decidedly perkier than the outgoing Honda. In the real world of rocks and roots, the TT provided a very competitive enduro power band. While no match for hardcore two-stroke off-roaders like KTM's 350 MXC, the TT was more than capable of keeping up with most other machines it was likely to encounter on the trail. Big hills and deep sand were no issue, and the TT could make quick work of climbs that would leave an XR250 rider searching for another downshift. In the tight woods, the Yamaha was an excellent companion, delivering gobs of smooth power that hooked up and pulled the TT over slimy rocks and slippery logs with ease. By modern four-stroke standards, the TT's power was super mellow and slow building, but this was not an issue in 1986. At the time, people expected their four-strokes to be smooth, mellow, and bulletproof, and the TT covered that in spades. For riding out west, the TT350's rather modest max power output made machines like Honda's XR600 and Yamaha's TT600 seem like better choices for high-speed desert work. It was fine for playing in the canyons and the occasional high-speed run, but sustained triple-digit speeds were not its forte. Keep it in its element, however, and it was a super fun and versatile machine. On the suspension end of things, the new TT350 was a bit of a mixed bag in 1986. The 41mm Showa forks offered 11 inches of ultra-plush travel that gobbled up small bumps and trail detritus well, but bottomed harshly once the speeds picked up. Slower riders praised its low-speed comfort, but fast guys lamented its utter lack of high-speed control. Large whoops and even minor jumps were too much for its soft springs, light damping, and flexy 41mm stanchions. At any sort of race pace, the forks wallowed and clanked as the overworked springs collapsed under the machine's 260-pound girth. If you backed it down to a more sedate pace, they worked well enough, but if you had any intention of bombing across the desert or doing a little track day play, you were likely going to want to get things beefed up. Out back, the situation was better, with the old-school Motocross providing a far more controlled ride than the forks. While the Shawa damper was still set up softly, it did not completely fall apart when pushed. The spring rates and overall damping were well suited to the bike's intended use, and as long as you did not go crazy trying to motocross it, the shock worked well. On the trail, it was super plush, and provided the kind of all-day comfort you expected from a Japanese off-road machine of the time. On the handling front, the TT350 was fairly nimble for a 260-pound four-stroke. The soft suspension, hefty weight, and prodigious engine braking provided excellent front-end traction, and the bike had no trouble snaking through tight tree sections. In high-speed turns, however, the underdamped forks held the bike back and made it difficult to trust what the front end was doing. Because of its large and tall motor, the TT also felt more top-heavy than most two-strokes at the time. At low speeds, this was not much of an issue, but you could sense the machine's significant mass and strong gyroscopic effect if you tried to pick up the pace. While this made the bike hard to knock off its course, it was also far more difficult to bring it back once it was astray. Riders accustomed to riding XRs and other four-strokes did not have much of an issue with this, but pilots coming off of lightweight two-strokes were often put off initially by the TT's more deliberate feel. On the detailing front, the TT350 was very well appointed for its time. With its well-shaped 2.5-gallon fuel tank and standard 55-watt halogen headlight, the bike could be ridden all day without fear of being stranded after dark. The motor proved utterly bulletproof and was happy to run for a decade or more with only minimal maintenance. The quick-pull rear axle and standard tool pouch made trailside repairs easy, and the standard guards for the rider's hands and front disc kept tree limbs and other bushes from fouling the works. Little touches like the TT's case-saver clutch guard, trip meter, and Zerk fittings were all bonuses that made living with the TT a pleasant and easy experience. On the downside of the TT equation were the Z-spoke hubs, which it had inherited from the YZs. They tended to break under hard use and were definitely not the hot setup in 1986. It also had an underpowered rear drum brake, which was offset somewhat by the engine's strong compression braking, and of course the marshmallow front forks. While most riders praised the TT's comfortable and attractive new bodywork, nearly everyone panned its old-school banana-style seat, which trapped the rider in one position and made sliding forward and back a chore. Overall, the 1986 Yamaha TT350 turned out to be a perfect successor to Honda's dearly departed XR350. For riders looking for more beans than the XR250R, but not as much tonnage as the XR600 or TT600, the 350 made an attractive case. It was torquey, moderately fast, fun to ride, and stone reliable. The very definition of a mid-80s Japanese thumper. It was a bit too slow, too soft, and too heavy for hardcore racing, but it was perfectly aligned with its core mission as a go-anywhere, do-anything, valve and cam jack-of-all-trades. So there you have it. That's the story of the 1986 Yamaha TT350, a machine, as I said in the intro, was only produced 2 years for some strange reason. I just don't know. The 87 bike is almost identical to this, just tiny little styling differences. And at least here in the U.S., they discontinued it. I would love to know the reasoning why. I mean, again, maybe it was just sales. I would think a bike like this would have been a really big hit. You know, people now go, Lord, we'd love to have cheap four-strokes that are reliable and fun to ride and don't cost you an arm and a leg. And this really fit the bill in that respect. It wasn't a motocross bike, obviously. If you're looking to motocross it, you would have, been much happier with a YZ or something else. Or if you really wanted to go the four-stroke game, really an ATK was probably your best choice. In 1986-87, like the ATK 560 was a badass machine if you wanted like a four-stroke that was really high performance. But if you're just looking for a great trail bike that does a little bit of everything, for back east here, it would have been a great machine. I don't know. It's kind of funny to me. Who knows? I'm sure there's a lot of stuff goes on behind the scenes that I don't know about. But I would love to have one of these. I'd love to pick one up now. I think it'd be super fun. But I know I've looked for them from time to time. It seems like they're pretty rare. I get maybe that's a good indication they didn't sell a ton of them. The fact that they're so hard to find now. So maybe people just weren't on board for some reason. Honda. I know, and I did that research for the XR350 deal. They Bruce Ogilvy said they had a ton of XR350s sitting in warehouses unsold, which. When I read that, it blew my mind. I'm thinking this, every magazine raved about the XR350. This is a great bike. It's, it's a kind of a great in-between machine. And for some reason, it didn't hit the market. Now, the 400, when it came out in the mid-90s, it took off. It was really, really popular bike. So maybe the market wasn't ready for that at the time. I don't know. Certainly Yamaha with their WR400 and then 450s later have been real popular machines. So there's obviously a market for that. Maybe it was a bike before its time. I don't know. In any case, if you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the other stuff I've done on the channel. If you could like, subscribe, share, put a comment in the comment section below. I'd really appreciate it. It helps the algorithm kind of share this video out to the people and helps more people find my stuff. So I definitely read all the comments and I respond. If you have any other bikes you'd like to see me do in the future, feel free to drop a comment there as well. So until we meet again, this is Tony Blazer for the Motocross Vault. Keep the rubber side down. Peace.